So this is the first time for me at DConf, and I'm quite excited. But what I want to report here was the experience of the Symmetry Autumn of Code, which, wait a second. Okay, all right. Which took place the last autumn, obviously, from September to December, and involved 3 participants, of which 2 are here today, me and Francesco, which is sitting right there, and with the objective of improving the D ecosystem. I don't like talking about me, but I'm a computer science student. I come from Italy, in Turin. I discovered D while I was trying to expand my experience and improve my knowledge. And I was coming from mainly a C background, so it was a nice discovery, so let's put it this way. And I was also looking forward to contribute to an open source code base, and I was quite interested in start contributing to D. So I discovered from Google Summer of Code ideas page, which was 2019, which the D Language Foundation wasn't accepted, that there was this need of HTTP2 in Vibe.d. I don't know if you're familiar with, well, I guess you're familiar with Vibe.d. How many of you use Vibe.d regularly? How many of you are familiar with the Vibe.http module? All right, quite much. Nice. So there was this plan to rebuild the module, improving it, and in the meantime also include support for HTTP2. So how many of you are familiar with HTTP2? All right. For all the others, I've prepared a couple of slides which are going to be a quick introduction on that. So there are main differences between HTTP1 and HTTP2. The 4 main differences are here, but on a low level, implementation level, there are much more. So the first one is that the protocol is stateful, so you have to maintain a connection state. It is a binary protocol, which means that you have to serialize everything you send and deserialize everything you receive. And then it builds upon TCP to integrate flow control and multiplex various requests on a single TCP connection, which is quite important when coming from HTTP1, because with HTTP1 you have this, for each request you need to open a new TCP connection, and this caused many problems when scaling on a large number of requests. Anyway, this talk is meant to be a report and is structured in 3 parts. The first one being a description of my work schedule. The second one is an experience analysis from the point of view of a participant, which I think could be useful if you need to start contributing with a project such as Symmetry Autumn of Code or Google Summer of Code. And the third one is a list of possible improvements which can be actually taught before a probable next edition of Symmetry Autumn of Code. So I had to design some milestones which were monthly reports which I had to fill in order to, get paid for my work. And the 3 of them are here. There are 3 building blocks which mainly are protocol switching from HTTP1 to HTTP2, the header completion algorithm, which I'm going to describe later, but it's based on ranges, and it's meant to serialize the headers of each request so that they take a little space with respect to the HTTP1 headers. And then there's the asynchronous handling of HTTP2 streams, which are just are request and response cycles, which was built using Vibe.d asynchronous I/O technology. So milestones, what are milestones? Were checkpoints. Each month I had to report to Mike, which is sitting back there, my progress, so that they could evaluate what we were doing and establish if the progress was actually, let's say, on par with what we defined on a previously submitted proposal. So the milestones were proposed by applicants, by us, which had to find a mentor and then discuss with them the possible strategy for the development of the process. So here comes the part of working with a mentor, which is, as at the beginning, some difficulties, has some benefits, but mainly my mentor was Sonke Ludwig, the maintainer of the Vibe.d repository, one of the maintainers actually, and we mainly talked about bugs found, about implementation issues, about high-level strategies, and we mainly talked using emails and GitHub PRs, since we weren't very fond of Slack, nobody of us. So one of the benefits of having a mentor when you start contributing to a project is that you can be followed. The main benefit is that you can be followed. The other benefit is that the constant communication flow, almost constant communication flow, can maintain focus, and I found this to be very helpful. Anyway, moving along, my workflow, I'm going very fast here because this is like needed for to explain what went on during the project. During September and October was mainly dedicated to studying and reading and studying and reading, and quite banging my head because I couldn't understand how Vibe.d core worked. I couldn't understand how HTTP2 worked, and I kept on going in circles and building my paper stack of things to do, which got like completely destroyed on a weekly basis. Then after a while, I started to wrap my head around it, and Song helped me with that a lot. And so I started with implementing the basic building blocks. The first of which was the HPAC header completion algorithm, which basically it's an Huffman encoding, slightly modified, which can be used to save and serialize headers as they are received, so that the next time you send a message on a request, they take less space with respect to the first time. This is supposed to be useful, and it's actually quite useful when you have a situation of a lot of requests which are coming sequentially and from the same origin, which it's actually quite often the case. From November to December, I had to devise a strategy to implement HTTP streams, which are request and response lifecycles. So a stream is composed of one request, one response, and all of this happens on the same TCP connection and can be multiplexed with other streams, which means other request and response. The particular thing here is that HTTP2 uses data dispatch mechanism, for which there are separate, are called frames, but it's a note. If I'm confusing here, you can raise your hand and ask, because I know I decided not to dig too deep on how HTTP2 worked, but I guess it can be pretty confusing from a listener point of view. Anyway, there was a lot of testing and bug fixing and testing and bug fixing going on, and we uses the asynchronous I/O capabilities of Vibe, which are based on tasks. I don't know if you're familiar with tasks, but are basically fibers or green threads, and to implement an efficient strategy, which I'm going to describe further. From December to January, and what is being pursued right now, because we're still working on it, is to complete the review of the last part of the project, because Sonk and I had our commitments to attend to, so it kind of got delayed, but it's there. And then there's some profiling to do and some other testing, some other bug fixing, testing and bug fixing. My point being, after this whole month, when the first time I was able to send a request to the web server and obtain a response, my reaction was this. and I felt like Frankenstein Jr.'s doctor for a while. But the point is, it's really alive, and it's there, and it can be tested. It's on the Vibe/HTTP experimental module, which the plan is to introduce as soon as everything has been ported to HTTP2 capabilities. And so how does it work? It works pretty much transparently with respect to the previously available HTTP module, in the sense that if you are using Vibe.HTTP for HTTP1, the support of HTTP2 comes at no cost of re-implementing anything. Simply, if you receive a request to upgrade to protocol using protocol switching to HTTP2, the flow you need the code you need to write to initialize a web server is the same. If you're using TLS, this is the only line you need to change, because for TLS we are using application layer protocol switching, which is one of the capabilities of the SSL and TLS suites, which allow to negotiate a protocol at the session layer instead of the application layer, talking in Aussie layers. The HPAC module, which is something we are pretty much proud of, is a simple interface of 2 methods which can be used and are based on ranges. So we are using exceptions right now, so it's not no GC for that reason, but it could be, because all the dynamic memory allocation have been pushed out of the module. It's very lightweight because it uses a static table to encode all the possible Huffman sequences. So instead of building a tree and having to decode everything using a tree, which required a lot of CPU and memory resources, we are following the approach of other web servers, such as one of them is Nginx, which is using a static table, quite big, like 3,000 lines of code, and to be more lightweight on CPU and memory, which avoids mainly the possibility of denial of service attacks, which is something that has been explored for HTTP2. HTTP2 message exchanges work by handling multiple HTTP requests, so over the same TCP connection. So that's one great step with respect to HTTP1, and something that needs actually it needs improvement right now, but it's working pretty well. We can comply with flow control restrictions, which are mainly restraints you can put on how much data you can send as a web server. So if my web client asks me, you can send me 800 kilobytes at most, I have to send him at most 800 kilobytes, and then I have to wait until he sends me another message telling me, hey, you can send me another 800 kilobytes. And we can comply with that, which was not easy, but we have done it. And then we are working on enforcing protocol correctness, because the RFC, which describes HTTP2, actually leaves most of the implementation details quite open. So we have means of defining priority between requests, priority between connections, which are actually not described. It's just written there, you know. They tell you, you can define priority if you want, but everyone uses their own approach. So we are working on defining those parts. And what is missing is mainly the last review of stream multiplexing and flow control, which is this, actually. And server push, which is a feature, an optional feature, an additional feature, which was introduced in HTTP2 to allow for a server to send data to a client without having received a previous request. This is quite controversial, but we decided to postpone just because it wasn't part of the actual implementation. And then there's testing, bug fixing, testing, bug fixing. So if anybody wants to help with that, we'll be very glad. A quick rundown of some of the interesting parts, which are not that much technical because this is not a technical presentation, but we use the ranges as a serialization interface, and they are one of the reasons why I think D was great for implementing a network protocol, because ranges allows us to provide a powerful extraction and write a module which is seamlessly integrates with all the other stream data structure which are part of Vibe.d. And we can support custom allocators, which means you don't have to depend on the garbage collector. You can use your own allocators. We have everything templatized on input ranges and output ranges, so you can use this module as a standalone module outside of the Vibe HTTP module if you need to have an HPAC implementation for your own web server. And this is quite easy, as can be seen here, because you just need to provide an encoded source and a destination, which in our case are a U-byte stream, a U-byte range, and the structure which describes the HTTP frame header. And there you need simply to provide your table, which is the table I was telling you before, the one which is encoding all the possible requests, and your allocator if you want to use some. I've talked about metaprogramming. This is very far from the metaprogramming which, for example, Robert told us about when he was telling about writing code that generates code. But we exploited some of the features of D to create the indexing table, which is an hash table, which contains both a static table, which is initialized generated at compile time, and a dynamic table, which is built around a ring buffer, and all of that while providing a unified interface. So you see we have a static table, a dynamic table, which is supposed to change during the execution because it's supposed to store what has been received, like we're talking about headers, so header name and header values. And those headers are made of name and abstract data type, algebraic data type key, which is made of integers, U-byte, or string, according to the type of header. This was pretty illuminating to implement, just because it allowed us to keep the lines of code to a minimum while providing something which is quite safe to work with, and in which it's quite easy to spot bugs. As you see, we use the same idea which is behind the chain when we were talking about std.range, which is we provide a unified address space while concatenating two of the table according to the index which is provided. So we have all the operator overloading to treat this as an hash table or a range. We used concurrency in a way to exploit the asynchronous I/O model, and we support message passing between tasks. But we built this architecture for the HTTP module, which is made of the event loop, the Vibe.d event loop, which for each connection spawns a task using run task, and passes everything along with the frame header to an HTTP connection handler. This then goes to the stream multiplexer, which is supposed to tell us, is this stream valid? So can I receive the request? Can this request respect the flow control scheme I've agreed with my client, and so on? And if that's true, we have the request handler, which is going to build a response and send the header's response, and then spawn another task, which is gonna dispatch all the data which is needed for the request, which can be an HTML web page, a CSS asset, an image, a PNG image, or whichever you want. And it's going to do that in chunk, because those chunks are what allows us to respect the flow control. As I told you, if I know I can send 800 kilobytes and I have to send more than that, I have to split my data in chunk, then wait after I send the first chunk, for the peer to send me another request, which tells me, hey, you can send me another pack of data. And in the meantime, I have to yield control to the event loop. So all this is built asynchronously. And that was what we did. And I can provide more details on that. But I want to focus on the experience analysis because I think it's important to analyze what went on from the point of view of a participant, so that maybe future participant can benefit from that, and from the point of view of the community as a whole, to see what we can improve on this experience. So, if I want to start contributing, and this is very related to what Sebastian talked about yesterday, if I want to start contributing and I see that the Symmetry Autumn of Code announcement, why should I participate to that? I could participate because it's a great occasion to learn. I could participate because it's easier to start when you have a mentor and when you're followed. And it's easier to gain insight about the dynamics of an open source community because you get to write to people which are inside it, you get to communicate with them and exchange opinion in a much easier way. All of that while being paid, which is a point I have to make, obviously. So, if you wish to start as a contributor and you have one of the following issues with that, so you can decide what to work on and you don't know maybe who to talk to because you don't know who's in charge of the various projects inside the ecosystem. Or maybe you have no experience and you're afraid of not completing your work. There are some things you can do which can help you a lot. The first one is that if you can decide what to work on, you can just go to the DLang wiki pages and gather some ideas from there. They list a series of possible useful projects, and for example, mine was on the GSOC 2018 ideas page. And for each project, there should be a mentor assigned. And I think this can actually be improved, and we're going to talk about that. But it's a great starting point. If you don't know who to talk to, there are the many communication channels, and I have an edit there after Sebastian's talk because he can explain it way better than I did. But you can post on the D forum, you can ask on IRC or Slack if you prefer Slack. You can write a simple proposal and send it to someone and say, hey, I want to start contributing. And where should I start? Sonke Ludwig actually did it for me, and it was very, very nice to talk with. And the third issue you can have is that if it's the third time your first time, of tackling a huge project, you might not know where to start, and you might have little understanding of it. So I don't know when to start from documenting myself. I don't know where to start from understanding the internal logic, but also the development process. And this is why there's a lot of time to be spent reading at the beginning. At least it was for me. So my first message is never be afraid of reading, actually. And in my case, I had to read a lot of stuff because the RFC are quite long and can be quite frustrating. But it's quite easy to wrap your head around the project. There's pretty much well-documented code on Phobos, except for maybe some modules, but it's not a topic for this talk. And also for Vibe.d, there's pretty much of documentation online from their website. And then there are similar projects which one can turn to. For example, in my case, I can have a look of other web servers implementation and reason about their strategies to, let's say, take hints. And then there's the community itself, which is pretty useful in that regard. Then there's mentoring, and mentoring is the key when you want to kick off your experience and start with a good rhythm, because as it was the case from this year, one of the participants found some difficulties which he couldn't cope with, and he had to leave. He also had less mentoring help because his mentor was was found later because of a turn of events. So one thing you could do if one situation like this come to be is communicate and let your needs be heard. So going with notes from the future, which I think are the most important part of this talk, these are geared towards the community, because when I come to reason with the help of Francesco, which is sitting right there, about what our experience was and how it was organized, how it was planned, we decided that it could be improved in some ways. So we know we have some benefits. We know we can spread the usage. We can push development of the features using a project like Symmetry Autumn of Code, for the simple reason that it brings new people inside the community. We know that if you have a fresh eye on a code base, it would probably find a new perspective on it. So fresh eyes and minds might solve bugs, which is something which shouldn't be overlooked. And as I said, there are benefits to that, both from the participant point of view, than to the community members' point of view and the foundation point of view. But there are risks, because in a project such as Symmetry Autumn of Code, if it could happen that participants drop early and don't finish the project, and that's a waste of resources mainly, and a pity actually. It might happen that the work which was planned in advance might require more time than what was decided to be. So, for example, in my case, I have to say I'm a little late. Yes, I am, because the milestone review which we had to complete for the beginning of this year is still going on, and that is not due to us, than to all the commitments that the mentor had, I had, and I guess it's not easy to plan in advance those things. Also, we have the introduction of new feature with the Symmetry Autumn of Code or Google Summer of Code projects, such as HTTP2, which have a risk to be orphaned. If the participants decide to leave after the experience because they did their work and they got their money and they're running with it, maybe, or simply they get tired and they're not satisfied with the experience, it might happen that the new features are left there. There are quite some examples of this. Well, one of that, I think, is the XML module on SAoC.experimental. So how can we improve that? We could build something like a desert switch, but that's not the point. The point is that we have to do, in my opinion, three things. We have to increase communication a little bit. We have to improve means of gathering of ideas, especially, because sometimes the wiki pages are not sufficient, sometimes they're not updated, sometimes they're not what they're not all that could be. And we have to determine if and when an actual project comparison between the participants is needed. So, communication issues. We didn't have much communication issues, but it is true that there were few of us. We were 3, then we came to be 2. And, but we saw that if one mentor decides to be busy 1 month, this can cause delays on milestones, and also if the participant has some other schedule for that month, this can cause delays. And if a participant is in need of help because his mentor cannot help him, or maybe he cannot provide all the knowledge he needs to use, there's the need to someone. And one thing we can do about this is to encourage participants to document their progress, so that other people can jump in and help them, knowing whatever they did in the previous months or days or weeks of work. To quantify an impact of a project for a participant is also quite difficult, because, for example, in my case, I don't know which impact it's going to have on the community. I mean, HTTP2 is quite useful if you have a large number of requests on let's say enterprise-grade web server, which needs to serve heavy content. So lots of cookies, lots of dynamic web pages, which exploit the multiplexing over a single TCP connection, exploit the fact that you can control every little bit of what is sent and what is received. But if you have, let's say, a static web page, a blog, maybe, it's not that useful. So what's the impact it's going to have on the community? I guess that is to be seen. But if with proper communication and with proper reporting, maybe on, I don't know, on the forum, on the IRC channels, of what is being done, maybe the community can provide more insights and more advices about what has been made and what is there to do. Another thing is about encouraging to post on the forum. We weren't really encouraged to do that. We weren't neither forced to do that, and I have to say I didn't do that, and I regret it. I should have made my progress more clear, maybe, just because it could be useful, it could have been useful to have some more insights about what we were doing. And I'm gonna publish with Mike a blog post about this, and so that we can discuss it more. But the aim of it is that participants might need to be motivated, and not just through the money or the fact that they are contributing to an open source project, but through the fact that their project seems and actually is useful. And sometimes I think they need to understand that from the community directly. The other thing I wish to concentrate about is that fostering ideas from the community is not that clear if we're coming from outside the community. Like, we have a series of DLang.org, wiki.dlang.org pages which kind of left unmaintained. Like, I don't know, we have project ideas, which is there, and it's been there for a long time, but I feel like nobody is looking after it anymore. We have a wish list, and if I'm coming from the outside and I say the wish list, I might think, hey, something in there is useful. Something is there needs my help. But then the last history commit is was 2015, so I guess that may not be updated. There are the language design discussions, which also are quite past our time, and there are a lot of projects which could be updated, could be removed, or I don't know. For example, let's take Calypso. Calypso is at a development stage which is way further what is described on the wiki, and I think this is about who's working on. It's an objective of who's working on Calypso to update the DLang wiki, but nevertheless, this may lower the quality of the information we have there. And this could also make other pages seem less, I don't know, worth of trust when you're deciding what to do and how to do it. So my suggestion here, and it's something which can be worked on, is to put some effort in maintaining one reference page, which can be periodically refreshed and cleansed of new ideas and old ideas. Can be easily reachable from the dlang.org website, because you don't want someone who wishes to contribute to have to navigate through the whole wiki to find that. With the objective of making contributors autonomous, so that they want to propose an application for the Symmetry Autumn of Code or the Google Summer of Code, they simply have to say, oh, there's this page, I go here, and I check the mentor, which is associated with a proposal. It might not be a mentor, it might be a maintainer, it might be someone who's responsible for that, it doesn't matter. But I think it could be very useful as a reference for planned and desired work which is needed in the community. Then there's the last point I wish to make, and I don't know, how am I on time? Can you give me ahead of time? Thank you. So the last point I wish to make is that project comparison can be difficult. We found ourselves in the situation in which one of us was to be awarded winner of the Symmetry Autumn of Code project, and our first reaction, at least my first reaction, was winner for what? And because our project were different, he worked on a garbage collector, I work on an application level protocol, because we designed our milestone. So we decided how to work and when to work on it. We communicate in different ways and with different frequencies, and add some kind of different development process. Mine was mainly write code, then submit a pull request, and then Sonke would tell me, oh no, you can't do that, you better do that other thing. And there was this review cycle which took a bit for each milestone and pull request, and there were about 15, 16 pull requests submitted of my side. So while Francesco, and I'm sure he can explain it better than I did, but Francesco has a lot of email exchanges and very few pull requests open, because it's his code base and his changes he has to submit was way less than what I had to submit. Anyway, how can we judge two different projects? And it's something, it was not very clear to me, and it's not very clear, it wasn't very clear at the presentation of the Symmetry Autumn of Code either. So we have to base on some objectively measurable quantity, which can be how many lines of code have been written, or how many pull requests have been submitted, how much he posted on the forum, or he or she posted on the forum, how much he exchanged emails. And so I gathered some data, we gathered some data, and well, this is what Francesco's did to make you understand that the difference between my work and his. He can explain it better than I can do, but he had to study a lot, he had to design a lot, and the point of this, he had to work less code than I did, but it surely took him more time to write that code. So, as you can see, we have two main differences there, which is that he exchanged a lot of emails while I exchanged very few. He wrote very few lines of code with respect to mine, but I think it can be said that I wrote very few lines of code too. And when I realized that this data was actually telling nothing, I I told myself, well, I cannot measure two, I cannot compare two projects like that. Because they are different, and there's a balance in which you have to work on for that. If I have my project, my actual implementation time required and mental overhead and such was way heavier than the time spent discussing it, because I have everything laid down on an RFC. I had a whole lot of documentation. Well, if you have to work on the runtime or something low level, it turns out that the actual implementation time, it's way less than what you have to put in discussion, in design, in benchmarks, and after that maybe profiling and considering if your contribution can be integrated properly. So what's the point? What's the point in comparing two projects? And I tried to reason about that, and I think that's a point that needs discussion. What's the point if you possible aims could be to strengthen competition so that each participant works more. And they work more because they want to win something. They want to win something, and they want to be awarded to be the best. But is it actually needed for project completion? I mean, if you are from the point of view of the community, you want something like this because, in my personal opinion at least, you can introduce changes and you can introduce new people inside it, and changes which can be used, which are useful and solid, or become solid with time actually. But none of the competition that could be enforced is geared toward project completion. To me, it's all about careful planning of what work has to be done, to ensuring mentors are available and willing, but I guess we have plenty of them, fortunately, and to consider interest and proposals over technical preparation, because that might not be a requirement. But the most important thing for me was that participants must document what they do. Because it might be that the work they did gets lost because they did it their own way, because nobody else is going to pick it up after they finished, and because they maybe don't have the time or the resources to finish. So I think one of the possible improvement is not necessary to enforce competition between participants, but it could be that enforced documenting and reporting and a little more planning time could benefit the project completion. So to conclude, because I think I'm almost out of time. All right. Symmetry Autumn of Code has been a great occasion for me, because I can be here and it's very exciting and it's the first time. So, by the way, sorry about my English. No, it's not that bad. But and it can be an approach to starting as a contributor, which is an alternative to doing all the work by yourself, which can be tedious, can be difficult, and sometimes it's just better to be followed on the first steps. But it needs more guarantees, in my opinion, that the work we did is useful and that it can be used and exploited after the project finishes. So, thank you. If you have any questions, I'm pretty happy.
All right, so raise your hand if you got a question, anyone. There we go. First question. All right, Sebastian's on it.
About your Vibe HTTP implementation, is there a plan how to implement the HTTP to push API?
Yeah, as I said, there's a plan, but we decided to postpone it because mainly because it's not actually necessary for the correct function of the web server. So if you need to focus on something right now, is to complete an efficient strategy for stream multiplexing, and then maybe to implement a proper way of deliver large files, which are another part of the issue. After that, we are planning to work on that, because we saw that there's a lot of requests and desire for that feature in particular. So it's gonna be there. It's just I cannot give you an ETA on that at the moment.
Cool. Anybody else?
I had my breakfast. I don't bite.
All right, questions going once, going twice, 3 times. That's it. Give it up again for Francesco.